Listen carefully. There is a moment that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. No music shifts, no cinematic slow motion, just two people in the same space again. Maybe it was accidental, maybe it was planned, maybe it lasted seconds. But for someone with an avoidant attachment pattern, that moment was not neutral, it was not empty, and it was not as calm as they tried to appear. If you've ever wondered what was going through their mind the last time they saw you, this is it. Not the surface reaction, not the polite expression, but the exact internal experience they would never say out loud. When they first saw you, their body reacted before their thoughts did. That's important. Avoidant psychology is rooted in nervous system protection. The moment their eyes registered your presence, there was a subtle jolt, a tightening in the chest, a spike of awareness. Their mind quickly scanned. Are we safe? Is this emotional? Is this going to pull me in? Even if their face stayed neutral, something inside them shifted. You weren't just a person in the room. You were history. You were attachment. You were unresolved emotion wrapped in a familiar form. And the first thought that flickered through them wasn't rejection. It was intensity. They noticed how you looked. They noticed your posture. They noticed if you seemed different, stronger, more distant, softer, colder. Avoidants are hyper-observant in moments like this because they need information. Information means control, and control means safety. They were reading you silently, even if they barely made eye contact. Did you smile first? Did you hesitate? Did you look hurt? Did you look unbothered? Every detail mattered because it told them whether they would need to defend themselves or prepare for emotional impact. And here's the part that may surprise you. Alongside that guarded analysis, there was a flash of something warm, familiarity, a memory of comfort, a quiet internal whisper that said, I know this person. For a split second, before the defenses rose, there was recognition. The nervous system remembers connection, even when the conscious mind tries to suppress it, but almost immediately after that warmth surfaced, the protective mechanism activated. Don't feel too much. Don't go there. Stay steady. That was the second wave of thoughts, the self-command. Stay calm, stay detached, keep it together. Avoidants are deeply uncomfortable with emotions that feel big, especially in real time. So when they saw you, especially if there had been distance or unresolved tension, they began regulating themselves quickly. Their breathing might have changed slightly, their shoulders stiffened, their expression became measured, not because they didn't care, but because caring feels like exposure, and exposure feels dangerous. Inside, there was a tug-of-war beginning. One side of them felt the pull of connection, the shared history, the subtle ache of what used to exist. The other side felt the threat of closeness. What if this pulls me back in? What if this becomes emotional? What if I lose control? That internal conflict is exhausting, and it happens in seconds. You may have seen someone who looked composed, but internally they were balancing instinct and fear at the same time. If you were calm and grounded, that unsettled them in a different way. They might have thought, they seem fine without me. That observation can sting more than they let on. Avoidants often expect to be the emotionally steady one, the one who withdraws first, the one who appears less affected. So if you didn't seem desperate or hurt, it created cognitive dissonance. Did they underestimate you? Did they misread your attachment? Or worse, did you move on? But if you looked emotional or vulnerable, that triggered something else entirely. Pressure, responsibility, the fear of being needed too much. Their mind may have said, I can't get pulled back into something intense. I can't handle emotional expectations right now. And so they pulled their energy inward. Not because your emotions were wrong, but because their nervous system associates emotional intensity with loss of autonomy. In that moment, they were also replaying memories without meaning to, small flashes. The last conversation, the last argument, the last time things felt good, the last time they felt overwhelmed. Memory in avoidant psychology is layered. They don't consciously sit and think about the relationship every day. But when they see you, the archive opens. And it opens fast. They remember how you looked at them when you were close. They remember the warmth, and they also remember the moments they felt trapped, pressured, or misunderstood. Both memories exist at the same time. That's why their expression can seem so unreadable. It's not blankness, it's dual processing. There was likely a quiet question running beneath the surface. Do they still care? They may never ask it, but it's there. Avoidants often crave reassurance without knowing how to seek it. They don't want to appear needy. They don't want to risk rejection. So instead, they look for signs: tone, eye contact, distance. Did you linger? Did you avoid them? Did you seem indifferent? Your behavior answered questions they didn't dare to voice. And if you were strong, if you held your composure, if you didn't chase, if you didn't overextend, that created another layer of internal reaction. Respect, confusion, maybe even attraction. Independence is something avoidants value deeply. When they see you embody it, it can shift their internal narrative. You are no longer the emotional pressure they feared. You become someone self-contained. That paradoxically feels safer. But here's something you need to understand. Even while they were trying to stay detached, they were feeling something. Maybe not in the loud, expressive way others do, but in a tight, controlled, internal way. Avoidants feel deeply. They just process differently. In the moment of seeing you, their primary goal was not connection. It was regulation. Keep the emotions manageable. Keep the interaction light. Keep the walls steady. And yet beneath that control, there was curiosity. Have they changed? Have I changed? What would happen if we talked longer? What would happen if we tried again? These thoughts may have been fleeting, almost immediately shut down, but they existed. Avoidants don't operate from indifference. They operate from caution. Every potential emotional opening gets evaluated through the lens of risk. If there had been unresolved conflict between you, they were likely scanning for blame or responsibility in subtle ways, not aggressively, but internally. Was I too harsh? Were they too demanding? Did I leave too fast? Or did they push too hard? Avoidants don't always consciously admit regret, but when confronted with the person again, the possibility of what could have been surfaces, and that can feel destabilizing. And then comes the quiet internal command again. Don't overthink this. It's just a moment. Stay cool. Stay neutral. They may have shortened the interaction intentionally, not because they didn't want to talk, but because prolonging it increases emotional exposure. The longer they stay, the more the walls have to work, and that's exhausting. If you notice distance, minimal words, a controlled tone, understand what that really means. It means their nervous system was active. It means they were managing something internally. It means you mattered enough to trigger a response. Indifference is calm and effortless. Avoidant detachment in moments like this is effortful, it's calculated, it's protective. After those first few seconds, their mind likely shifted into assessment mode. Where are we now? Is this completely over? Is this unresolved? Is there tension? Is there possibility? They might not have had clear answers. Avoidants often avoid clarity, because clarity requires vulnerability. But the questions were there. And while they stood there, appearing composed, another layer was unfolding. Comparison. How do they look compared to when we were together? Do they seem happier? Did I lose something valuable? Or did I escape something overwhelming? That internal comparison can be uncomfortable, because it forces them to confront reality instead of the simplified story they may have told themselves after distancing. If you walked away first, they watched, even if subtly, even if only for a second, and when you left their physical space, there was a shift again, a drop in stimulation, a quieter internal echo. That's when the delayed processing begins. Avoidants often don't feel the full weight of an interaction until after it's over, when they're alone, when they're back in their own environment, when there's no one watching. But in that initial encounter, what dominated was tension between longing and self-protection. They might have thought, I miss the good parts, and almost simultaneously, I can't risk the hard parts again. That contradiction is the core of avoidant psychology. It's not that they didn't feel, it's that feeling feels unsafe without guaranteed control. If you're watching this and wondering whether you meant anything in that moment, understand this clearly. You don't activate someone's defense system unless there's something to defend against. You don't trigger emotional regulation unless there's emotion present. The fact that they had to stay composed means there was something underneath the surface worth containing. And that's the part people rarely talk about. Avoidants don't walk into encounters like this blank. They walk in prepared to manage themselves, prepared to stay steady, prepared not to reveal too much, because somewhere in their past, vulnerability felt overwhelming. So when they saw you, they weren't thinking, "I feel nothing." They were thinking, "Handle this carefully." In those first moments, they were balancing memory, attraction, fear, pride, curiosity, and self-protection all at once. And that's why it may have felt confusing to you. The energy was layered, mixed, controlled, but charged. The last time they saw you, the truth is this: you weren't invisible to them, you weren't irrelevant, you were significant enough to activate their entire internal system. And while they may never articulate the exact thoughts that rushed through their mind, you can understand the pattern: initial shock, emotional suppression, silent observation, internal conflict, hidden insecurity. And if you felt something unspoken in the air, that wasn't your imagination. That was two attachment systems recognizing each other again, one trying to reach, one trying to regulate, both feeling more than they were willing to show. That moment may have ended quietly, but inside them it was not quiet at all. That moment may have ended quietly, but inside them it was not quiet at all. Because even as they walked away, even as the conversation shifted or the eye contact broke, something stayed active beneath the surface. The nervous system doesn't just switch off, it carries the imprint of the encounter. And as the seconds passed, the internal dialogue grew louder. Once you were no longer directly in front of them, the control they held so tightly began to loosen just a little. That's when the deeper processing started. In real time, avoidants focus on containment. After the moment ends, they begin to feel, not dramatically, not in a way that overwhelms them, but in subtle waves, a replay of how you looked at them, the tone in your voice, the space between your words. They start dissecting it internally. And here's something most people don't realize. When they saw you, vulnerability was triggered almost instantly. Not necessarily yours, theirs. Seeing someone who once had emotional access to them activates an old doorway, a memory of being known. And being known is powerful. It strips away distance. It reminds them that someone has seen behind the composure. That awareness alone can make them tighten up. In that moment, even if they were smiling politely or speaking casually, there was a protective script running in the background. Don't reveal too much. Don't let your voice soften. Don't linger too long. Keep the conversation neutral. Keep your posture steady. This script is automatic. It formed long before you ever entered their life. It's how they survived closeness without feeling swallowed by it. But beneath that script was another thought they probably didn't want to admit. What if I still care more than I'm supposed to? That question can feel dangerous, because if the answer is yes, it threatens the narrative they've built to justify distance. Avoidants often tell themselves that space was necessary, that independence was healthier, that detachment was logical. Seeing you can poke holes in that logic. If there was even a flicker of warmth when they saw you, they likely shut it down quickly, not because it wasn't real, but because warmth invites possibility, and possibility invites risk. So instead of leaning into that flicker, they converted it into analysis. They started measuring the interaction. Was it awkward? Was it smooth? Did they feel drawn in? Did they feel pressured? They look for evidence to support emotional safety. Another thing that happened in that encounter is something very few talk about. They measured your energy. Not in a mystical sense, in a psychological one. Were you grounded? Were you anxious? Were you distant? Avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional intensity. If your presence felt calm and self-contained, that may have disarmed them slightly. If your presence felt charged with expectation, that may have reinforced their caution. And here's where it becomes complex. If you seemed independent, it may have stirred a strange mixture of relief and attraction. Relief because independence reduces the threat of emotional engulfment. Attraction because strength commands respect. But if you seemed like you still deeply cared, still emotionally open, that could have stirred both validation and anxiety. Validation because it reassures them they mattered. Anxiety because it implies responsibility. There's often a silent calculation happening. Can I handle this? Not just the interaction, but the emotions attached to it. Avoidants are not incapable of love. They are wary of emotional overwhelm. So when they saw you, the question wasn't, do I feel nothing? It was, if I feel something, can I manage it? And sometimes there's another hidden layer, ego. They may have wondered whether you still saw them the same way, whether you still admired them, whether you still felt drawn. Pride can be a shield for avoidance. It protects them from confronting vulnerability. So if you seemed unaffected, that could bruise the ego slightly, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet internal way. They might have thought, have they outgrown me? That thought is uncomfortable, because it implies loss of control. If you no longer orbit them emotionally, their previous distance loses its power. Avoidants are often more shaken by your calm detachment than by your emotional pursuit. When you stop chasing, it forces them to confront their own feelings without distraction. While standing there, part of them may have also been scanning for threat, not physical threat, emotional threat. Will this turn into a serious talk? Will they bring up the past? Will I have to explain myself? That anticipation alone can cause them to stay guarded. The more unresolved history there is, the stronger the internal brace. But beneath all of that control, there can be regret. Not always fully formed, not always consciously admitted, but present. Regret about how things ended, regret about words unsaid, regret about pulling away too quickly or not communicating clearly. Seeing you can momentarily reopen those questions. Did I handle that well? Did I protect myself too aggressively? Could it have been different? They won't usually show regret outwardly. Vulnerability feels like losing ground. But internally, they might replay moments where they could have responded differently. The mind does this quietly, a small scene flashing in their memory, a conversation they cut short, a time they chose silence instead of honesty. These flashes don't mean they want to rush back, they mean the attachment wasn't erased. And as the interaction continued, they were likely trying to keep their emotional temperature steady. If they felt drawn toward you, they leaned back internally. If they felt defensive, they tried to appear relaxed. There is constant micro-adjustment happening. It's exhausting, which is why avoidants often prefer short encounters after distance. Long exposure requires sustained emotional management. If you spoke confidently, if you held eye contact without intensity, if you seemed whole on your own, that may have planted a seed in them, a new image of you, not the version they distanced from, but a version that feels less threatening. That seed may not grow immediately, but it lingers. After the interaction ended and they were physically alone again, that's when the emotional echo expanded. Avoidants are delayed processes. In the moment they contain, afterward they contemplate. They might sit in silence and replay the tone of your voice, the way you said goodbye, whether there was softness there, whether there was finality. This is where the hidden insecurity resurfaces. Do they still care? If they sense distance from you, it can create an unexpected ache, not loud, not dramatic, but subtle. The realization that someone who once reached toward them may no longer be reaching. That shift can destabilize their sense of control. And here's something deeply important. Avoidants often confuse emotional intensity with danger. So when they feel stirred after seeing you, they may try to reinterpret it. They might tell themselves it's just nostalgia, or ego, or habit, anything but vulnerability. Because admitting vulnerability would require openness. There is also comparison happening during this phase. How did that interaction make me feel compared to being completely alone? Did I feel drained? Did I feel alive? Did I feel tense? These questions shape what they do next. If the encounter felt manageable, even slightly positive, it can soften their internal resistance. If it felt overwhelming, they retreat further. But even retreat is not indifference, it's protection. If there was a moment during that encounter where your eyes held theirs a second longer than expected, they felt it. If there was a pause where words could have gone deeper but didn't, they noticed. Avoidants are extremely aware of near vulnerability moments. Moments where something real almost surfaced. Those almost moments linger in their mind long after the interaction ends. They might wonder what would have happened if they had said more, if they had asked a deeper question, if they had let their tone soften. But then the protective voice returns. It's better this way. Stay safe. Stay independent. And yet, despite that voice, curiosity can grow quietly. What are they thinking right now? Did they feel the tension too? Did they see through my composure? That curiosity sometimes becomes the reason they reach out later. Not impulsively, not immediately, but after enough internal processing builds pressure. If you're listening to this and questioning your impact, understand this clearly. When someone with avoidant patterns sees a person who once mattered deeply, it is never neutral. It activates attachment memory. It activates defense. It activates self-reflection. The silence they showed you was not emptiness. It was effort. They may have walked away appearing steady, but internally, there was evaluation, emotion, protection, and possibility all intertwined. They may never confess that your presence unsettled them, but unsettlement is proof of significance. The next 5 layers of their experience revolve around this truth: vulnerability was triggered, control was asserted, energy was measured, insecurity flickered, and delayed emotion began forming. That's what was happening beneath the calm exterior. And here's the part that matters most for you. Their guardedness does not define your worth. Their restraint does not erase the connection. Sometimes the quietest reactions are the ones that carry the most internal weight. When they saw you, they were not thinking, "This means nothing." They were thinking, "Handle this carefully. Don't lose control. Don't open too much." But also, "Why does this still feel like something?" That question is what lingers with them, even if they never say it aloud. That question is what lingers with them, even if they never say it aloud, because once that question exists, why does this still feel like something? It begins to reshape the story they've been telling themselves, and avoidants survive through story, through narrative, through carefully constructed explanations that justify distance and maintain emotional equilibrium. After the encounter, after the replaying and the subtle waves of delayed feeling, they begin forming a conclusion, not necessarily the truth, but a version of it that feels manageable. This is where the internal narrative takes shape. They might tell themselves it was just closure, or just coincidence, or just nostalgia. They downsize the emotional weight so it doesn't threaten their autonomy. But shrinking the story doesn't erase the sensation. If there was even a flicker of regret, this is when it grows louder. Not in a dramatic, tearful way. Avoidant regret is quiet. It sounds like a thought at night when everything else is silent. Maybe I could have handled that better. Maybe I shut down too quickly. Maybe I didn't say what I actually felt. These thoughts are not constant, but they resurface unexpectedly. Regret is complicated for someone who fears vulnerability, because admitting regret requires admitting that something mattered deeply, and that admission can feel destabilizing. So instead of sitting with it fully, they might shift into analysis again. They dissect the dynamic. They assign logic to emotional decisions. They try to intellectualize what was felt physically. But even logic has limits. The body remembers connection differently than the mind rewrites it. If you seemed grounded and strong when they saw you, that image stays with them. It challenges the older perception they may have relied on to maintain distance. If you are no longer reaching, no longer chasing, no longer emotionally available in the same way, it forces a subtle power shift. And power shifts unsettle avoidance. Because when you stop chasing, the emotional spotlight turns back toward them. They can no longer focus on managing your emotions. They have to confront their own. This is where something unexpected often happens. Curiosity becomes heavier. They may find themselves wondering what you're doing later that day, who you're talking to, whether you've truly moved on, not out of possessiveness in a loud way, but in a quiet, internal checking way. The possibility that you are no longer emotionally orbiting them can spark an unfamiliar discomfort. Avoidants are used to controlling emotional distance, but when the other person becomes self-contained, it disrupts that dynamic. It creates a vacuum, and vacuums pull attention. They might open their phone and stare at your contact without messaging. They might scroll past your name and pause. They might reread an old conversation without intending to. These are not impulsive acts of longing. They are controlled glances at unresolved attachment. And here's where the attachment wound underneath begins to surface. At the core of avoidant psychology is an early belief: closeness leads to overwhelm or loss of self. That belief doesn't disappear just because feelings exist, so when they felt something after seeing you, it activated both desire and fear. The desire whispers. There was something real there. The fear responds, and real things hurt. If you're watching this, understand that their silence afterward does not automatically mean they felt nothing. Sometimes silence is how they stabilize. It's how they prevent themselves from making decisions in an emotionally stirred state. They withdraw to regain internal equilibrium. But withdrawal doesn't cancel internal motion. The encounter may also have triggered comparison with their current life. Are they happier now? More peaceful? More alone? Seeing you can highlight what is missing or what was difficult, and that comparison is rarely comfortable. If there were good memories attached to you, those rise. If there were intense or painful ones, those rise too. Avoidants often struggle with emotional integration. Holding both good and bad at once feels destabilizing. So they may choose one lens, either idealizing the distance or romanticizing the past. But the truth is usually in the tension between both. Another thought that may have surfaced quietly: would it be different now? That question is dangerous for them because it opens the door to possibility, and possibility requires risk. If they sensed that you had grown emotionally steadier, less reactive, more self-possessed, that could soften their fear slightly. It changes the equation. It suggests that closeness might not equal chaos, but even softened fear is still fear. So instead of acting on that shift, they observe it from a distance. And here's the paradox. The more calm and self-sufficient you appear, the safer you feel to them. But the safer you feel, the more they risk re-engaging emotionally. And that's where their internal system hesitates. There is also pride involved. Avoidants don't like to feel like they lost control of a situation. If they were the one who distanced first, seeing you composed can bruise the ego quietly. It challenges the assumption that they were the less attached one. And ego discomfort often translates into temporary coolness. But coolness does not equal indifference. It often equals recalibration. As hours pass after the encounter, their emotional state settles, but the memory of it lingers. A specific look you gave, a tone shift, the way the air felt slightly heavier than usual. Avoidants are extremely sensitive to subtle relational cues. They just don't display that sensitivity outwardly. They might start questioning their own narrative. If it truly meant nothing, why am I still thinking about it? That question can be unsettling, because it suggests unfinished emotional business. This is often when delayed desire appears, not necessarily to restart everything, but to understand, to clarify, to regain equilibrium. They may consider reaching out casually, testing the waters, keeping it light. Avoidants prefer low-intensity openings. They rarely jump straight into emotional depth. But even if they don't reach out, the encounter shifts something internally. It rehumanizes you. It reminds them you're not just a memory or a simplified story. You are real, present, independent, and that can stir a quiet respect. At the same time, fear still whispers. If I open this door again, will it demand more than I can give? That's the core tension. Avoidants are not afraid of you specifically. They are afraid of losing autonomy, of being consumed by expectation, of failing emotionally. If you sensed distance in their demeanor, it was likely an attempt to maintain structure. Structure keeps emotions predictable. Predictability feels safe. But here's what you need to hear most clearly. When someone with avoidant patterns sees a person who once mattered deeply, their system does not stay neutral. It activates, it evaluates, it protects, it wonders. The truth is, indifference is easy. What's hard is managing unresolved attachment while pretending it doesn't exist. If they truly felt nothing, the encounter would not replay later. It would not create subtle curiosity. It would not trigger comparison or ego discomfort or quiet regret. Emotional neutrality leaves no echo, and yet there was an echo. They may never articulate this out loud. They may continue forward as if nothing significant occurred, but internally, something shifted, even if only slightly. And here is where we land in this stage of the story. After seeing you, they constructed a manageable narrative. They felt flickers of regret. They measured your independence. They experienced subtle insecurity. Their attachment wound stirred. They compared past and present. They questioned possibility. They wrestled with pride. They processed in silence. And through all of that, one quiet truth remained beneath the surface. It was never indifference. It was protection layered over feeling. If you walked away wondering whether you imagined the tension, whether you projected meaning onto something neutral, understand this: emotional systems recognize significance even when mouths stay silent. You mattered enough to activate thought, enough to trigger defense, enough to be replayed later in solitude. And sometimes, in the world of avoidant psychology, that is the loudest proof you will ever receive. And sometimes in the world of avoidant psychology, that is the loudest proof you will ever receive. Because what happens next is quieter, but even more revealing. In the days that follow, the encounter doesn't just disappear, it settles into them. It becomes something they return to mentally when they least expect it. Maybe while driving, maybe while lying in bed, maybe in the middle of an otherwise ordinary moment. Your face flashes across their mind without warning. The sound of your voice echoes unexpectedly, and for a split second, their guard drops because there's no one there to witness it. This is where the truth begins to surface internally. They start asking themselves questions they avoided before. Did I misjudge that connection? Was I too quick to detach? Was I protecting myself or running? These questions don't come all at once. They come in fragments. Avoidants rarely dive headfirst into emotional self-examination. They circle it slowly, cautiously. But once triggered, it's difficult to fully suppress. There's also something else happening beneath the surface: recalibration of identity. Avoidants often define themselves by independence, by emotional self-sufficiency. But when they feel stirred after seeing you, it challenges that self-image. If I'm so detached, why did that affect me? If I truly moved on, why am I replaying that moment? That internal contradiction can create discomfort, and discomfort leads to one of two paths. They either lean further into distance to regain their sense of control, or they slowly soften. If they lean into distance, it might look like increased silence, fewer outward signs of reflection, a reinforcement of the narrative that everything is fine. But understand this clearly: increased distance after emotional activation is not proof of indifference, it's proof of overwhelm. Avoidants often need space not because they don't care, but because caring feels destabilizing. They withdraw to regulate, they retreat to re-establish internal order. But if they soften even slightly, you may notice subtle shifts: a small message, a reaction to something you post, a casual check-in disguised as something practical. Avoidants rarely re-enter emotionally through grand gestures. They test the waters quietly. They approach through low-risk openings. Why? Because vulnerability terrifies them more than loneliness. There is also the matter of pride and fear intertwined. If they were the one who pulled away first, reaching out again requires admitting that their initial certainty may have been flawed. That's hard. It threatens their sense of decisiveness. So instead of saying, "I miss you," they might say something neutral, something surface level, something that allows them to maintain dignity. But beneath even that subtle outreach is something raw: longing. Longing doesn't always mean wanting to rebuild everything immediately. Sometimes it simply means wanting to feel understood again, to revisit familiarity, to touch something that once felt emotionally significant. And if they choose not to reach out, it doesn't erase the longing. It simply means fear outweighed desire at that moment. There's another layer most people never consider. When they saw you, and especially if you appeared emotionally steady, it may have planted a seed of respect. Respect shifts attraction. It transforms you from someone who felt emotionally overwhelming into someone who feels self-contained. And self-contained energy feels safer to someone who fears engulfment. They may start re-evaluating the dynamic from a different angle. Maybe it wasn't the connection itself that felt suffocating. Maybe it was the intensity at the time. Maybe it was their own inability to communicate boundaries. That reflection doesn't happen loudly. It unfolds slowly, privately. And here is where something deeply human happens. They begin to confront the possibility that their avoidance protected them, but also cost them. That realization is painful. Because avoidance works, it shields, it prevents emotional overload. But it also limits intimacy. It keeps depth at arm's length, and when they see someone they once felt deeply connected to standing strong without them, it highlights what might have been lost. Loss is a difficult emotion for someone who copes through detachment, so they may not sit in it fully. They may brush past it, but the awareness lingers. You may never hear them say, "I felt something when I saw you," but internally, the truth has already registered. There is also the possibility of jealousy surfacing in subtle ways, not dramatic jealousy, not confrontation, but quiet curiosity about your life. Who are you becoming? Who has access to you now? Are you sharing that calm strength with someone else? That thought can create a flicker of possessiveness they didn't expect. Avoidants often don't realize how attached they are until the idea of replacement enters the picture. If they sense that you truly might move forward without them, it shifts something primal. It activates fear of permanent loss, and fear of loss can momentarily override fear of closeness, but only momentarily. Because soon, the protective voice returns. Stay careful. Don't get pulled back into something uncertain. Keep your independence intact, and this internal battle continues quietly. Meanwhile, you might be wondering what that look meant, what that pause meant, whether you imagined the tension, and here is the truth that ties all of this together. When someone with avoidant patterns sees a person who once accessed their vulnerable side, it shakes something foundational. It reminds them that beneath the composure, they are still human, still capable of attachment, still capable of missing someone. The difference is, they process it in private. If they seemed emotionally flat during the encounter, it was not emptiness, it was effort. Effort to maintain equilibrium, effort to prevent old wounds from reopening too fast, effort to stay in control. Control is their safety net. But here is something powerful for you to understand. Your growth changes the dynamic more than their distance ever could. If you walked away grounded, if you stopped chasing, if you embodied quiet strength, you altered the emotional equation. You removed pressure, and in doing so, you created space for them to feel without reacting defensively. That doesn't guarantee action, it doesn't guarantee reconciliation, but it changes perception. And perception is everything in avoidant psychology. Over time, the intensity of the initial encounter settles into something more reflective. They may come to a simple but profound realization. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I didn't know how to handle caring without feeling threatened. That realization is not always comfortable. It requires humility. It requires acknowledging emotional limitation, and not everyone is ready for that level of self-awareness. But the seed exists, and seeds grow in silence. If you are listening to this hoping for clarity, here is what you can hold on to. The last time they saw you, they felt something. It activated memory, defense, curiosity, pride, insecurity, regret, longing, and fear, sometimes all at once. They measured your strength, they questioned their narrative, they protected their vulnerability, they processed in solitude, they wrestled with pride, they considered possibility, they weighed independence against connection. And above all, they tried to stay composed, because composure is their armor. But armor only exists when there is something worth shielding. You were not invisible to them. You were not meaningless. You were a mirror, a reminder, a trigger for both fear and feeling. And whether they choose to reach out or remain silent, the truth remains steady beneath it all. It was never indifference. It was a person who learned to survive by stepping back from emotion, standing face to face with someone who still had the power to stir it. And sometimes in the quiet world of avoidance, stirring emotion is the deepest form of significance there is.